What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 6 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, an episode called Udûn, directed by Charlotte Brandstrom, and it was written by Nicholas Adams, Justin Doble, J.D. Payne, and Patrick McKay. And Charlotte Brandstrom, she's actually very experienced in the world of television. She's directed episodes of shows like The Outsider, The Witcher, Jupiter's Legacy, and Outlander. And I think it's safe to say that this episode gave us the best and the worst that this show has to offer. And let me elaborate. First and foremost, no Harfoots, which is always a positive. But I feel like there were some genuinely, or at least there was one genuinely interesting dramatic scene, which was a first for this show. And I'm talking about the scene between Adar and Galadriel, where Adar explains the origins of kind of the first orcs, or the Uruk, as he likes to describe them, or the Sons of the Dark. And for the first time I realized, you know what? I actually have a character on this show that I want to root for, someone that I'm actually emotionally invested in, someone who's dramatically complex, someone who has contradictions, someone who has flaws. And what was interesting was how in this scene where Galadriel is having a face-off with the most pronounced villain of the show so far, that somehow he drew out or called attention to and underlined all of her flaws as a character, not in terms of being an interesting character, but flaws in terms of the overall design and how she's written as the hero of this show. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. First and foremost, spoilers, obviously. If you have not yet seen the episode, go do so. I probably should have said that from the outset, but at this point, who gives a shit if you're that worried about spoilers for this show? Maybe you, I don't know, maybe you're also a fan of drinking pond water, which is sometimes more tasty than this show. But in that, I've spent so much time calling attention to this show's flaws over the last couple weeks. Let's change things up and start with all the positive, or at least the positive as I saw it in this episode. And sometimes it's just little details, like that really cool detail of that gauntlet worn by Adar. It's like, you know what? That is some interesting costume design. It looks like something that the armies of Mordor or Sauron or Morgoth would wear. And so, once again, just a little detail for Adar, but it just makes him look cool. And step one to making a character seem cool, give him a cool look. And it was early on in this episode where I realized I was just going to have a lot more fun by rooting for the bad guys. And I love villains, but in the original trilogy by Peter Jackson, I never rooted for the villains. I might have been fascinated by Saruman, or riveted by the Balrog, or loving the Uruk-hai, or whatever the case might be. But in the absence of really great, compelling heroes in which I can get emotionally invested, fuck it, I'm just going to root for Adar and all of his orc buddies. And in a strange way, this episode might have given us the most sympathetic portrayal of orcs out of any adaptation of Tolkien, or I'm using the term adaptation very loosely, but I felt like Adar actually made a really interesting case toward the end of the episode about how orcs are individuals and they have names and they're worthy of respect and they're worthy of a land of their own. I was like, God damn, dude, you're kind of convincing me. Like, I don't even know if it was intentional, where the writers almost kind of accidentally blundered into some decent writing for once, because throughout the rest of the episode, the writing was just god-awful, to the point where I was like, you know what? Maybe it would just be better if the characters just don't talk anymore, because the dialogue just rings so hollow. And there are so many times where it's overly earnest, but it's overly earnest with none of the depth of feeling that they're reaching for. And I think that's what opens up the show to ridicule. When you're trying too hard to sound inspiring or philosophical or poetic, but you just can't quite pull it off. That's why people are so frequently taking shots at this show over and over and over again. And a perfect example would be some of the lines uttered by Galadriel this episode, like when she tries to sound really harsh and says, "Eat your tongue." And then she follows it up a few seconds later with, "One cannot satisfy thirst by drinking seawater." It's just like these idiotic, kind of fake, profound expressions that are completely, totally superficial, that kind of vaguely sound reminiscent of something that Tolkien would have written if Tolkien had happened to spend the majority of his life drinking poisoned water that came out of lead pipes. But I'm getting distracted because I promised I was going to focus on the positive at first, and I got sidetracked. Sorry, I couldn't help it. So what else did I like? I enjoyed seeing Arendir indulge in some action, and I wouldn't say it was the world's greatest action, but at least it was action. And if you've been following my videos, in the last one I said what I'm rooting for, what I'm hoping for, is Arendir just going on a murderous rampage and fucking up a bunch of orcs. And in this episode, he finally did. Some of the fight scenes were a little clunky, but at least they were violent. At least they had some visceral intensity, and at least there was some bloodshed and mayhem. And once again, it keeps the characters from talking to each other and uttering this horrendous dialogue if they're hacking each other to pieces. And the last positive for me would be the igniting of Mount Doom, even if I felt like the way they got to that point was completely, totally ridiculous and a perfect example of how nobody seems to think anything through on this. It's either a show written by idiots or a show written for idiots, where they just assume that we'll mindlessly consume anything they put in front of us without thinking it through at all. And I guess I'm just going to have to switch into the negative side of my review now, because there are scenes this episode where one's suspension of disbelief are totally pulverized or destroyed. Or if you stop and think about the scene, even for a couple of seconds, it completely falls to pieces. The scene that I hated the most by far should have been the most dramatically compelling and the most emotionally soaring. And that's when we see the Númenóreans riding hell for leather to help save the day in this village. And under normal circumstances, it would have been this incredible dramatic beat where you're like, fuck yeah, like the cavalry's coming. However, it's completely idiotic how those characters got to that point, because we see the Númenóreans sailing to Middle-earth. We see them looking at a map and say, hey, well, maybe we'll go up this river and explore this vale up here. But never at any point do they receive any intelligence or any information about what is taking place up there. And that's obviously the Vale that will one day be the Morgul Vale, one of the gateways into Mordor that's heavily guarded. But there's no information that would have prompted them to get off their boats, get on their horses, and go riding at a full gallop, because you wouldn't be riding with that sense of urgency unless you know, oh, people are fighting to the death. We need to get there as fast as humanly possible. It's almost like they're just riding at a dead gallop, hoping that maybe by chance they'll just bump into some people that are in need of their help. It drove me fucking crazy. Now, in contrast, let's wind the clock back to a similar scene in Return of the King, where the Riders of Rohan show up at the Battle of Pelennor Fields in order to try and lift the siege on Minas Tirith. And it's not like they just happened to go riding south and said, oh shit, look at all these orcs. The beacons had been lit. Gondor called for aid. Rohan answered. And so it was an earned dramatic beat, and I would say arguably maybe the biggest dramatic beat of the original trilogy. I mean, it made me fucking openly weep when I saw that. And you could tell they're kind of reaching for a similar moment in this episode, but they don't earn it. They don't do any of the work to get to that point. And I love how the Númenóreans are suddenly all just experts at fighting orcs. They even have tactics worked out specifically for that village, in spite of the fact that none of them have ever seen that village before or had any prior knowledge that the orcs would be there, like riding through those chains and that sort of thing. But it had just been established in the previous episode that the Númenóreans barely know which end of the sword to hold on to. And yet somehow they show up with the battle skills of like the goddamn Kurgan, just laying waste to every single orc in front of them. It's almost as if the writers don't expect us to remember what has come before in the show or what has already been established. Like, if they actually were following the lore of Tolkien, it would be very believable and it would be very convincing that the Númenóreans are total badass warriors. But they contradicted that with the previous episodes. So once again, it's just really sloppy writing, really sloppy story construction. And another thing that drove me crazy was, why are they having the battle in the village in the first place? Nobody ever withstands a siege from a village full of thatched roofs. Basically, villages are there to be burned and destroyed, and then you rebuild the villages and you replant your crops. But during a siege, like at the end of Two Towers, all the peasants and all the villagers, you go to a fortification of some kind because they're easier to defend. That's why you build towers and keeps and castles in the first place, because it's easier to defend those than it is a bunch of wooden constructs. And yet somehow, in the infinite wisdom of these characters, they decide to leave a place that's easily defended to a place that's impossible to defend, because they want to try to use that tower as like some sort of weapon to kill off a few of the orcs ahead of time. It was completely idiotic. It's like, oh, here we have walls and stone surrounding us. Let's leave this and go to a place made out of straw. in order to fight the orcs there. Once again, either the writers are idiots or they think we are idiots. Either way, it's a problem, and it's frustrating because this episode with a few little tweaks and a few little revisions could have been really good. This was an opportunity for the show to really hit a turning point, find its footing, and kind of justify all of the people who have been very loyal to the show. I mean, I've been a little critical of this show. Some people have been heavily critical of this show, but there are people out there who have been devotedly watching it and hoping for it to get good. I think there are a lot of people out there who love the idea of this show possibly being good so much that they're willing to endure 1, 2, 3 seasons of dog shit if their faith gets, rewarded or justified at some point. And this episode came close, but then it just stumbles and trips at every available opportunity. And a perfect example is this strange roundabout way by which Mount Doom somehow gets ignited. And for my part, if Sauron were going to light Mount Doom, he would do so with a sense of purpose, at a time of his choosing. He would not leave it up to chance. That somehow a bunch of bumbling humans eventually would figure out, oh, let's stick this blade in this socket and twist it, allowing a river to somehow set off some steam and get some lava going so that Mount Doom would just explode, sending flaming rocks in every direction. But let's ignore the physics for a moment. If you want to set up Sauron as the great big villain who, through this vast conspiracy, is going to manipulate Celebrimbor and the elves into helping them forge the Rings of Power, as well as orchestrating the downfall of Numenor, you can't set him up in a way where the key pieces of his plan fall into place by complete and total blind chance and accident. And first and foremost, Mount Doom was always a goddamn volcano. One of the main reasons that Sauron chose Mordor as his dwelling place in the first place was because it was ringed in by mountains on 3 sides and had the biggest volcano where he would eventually forge the One Ring. At any rate, I'm just glad that Mount Doom is ignited, even if I feel like you have to twist yourself in knots not to completely, totally call bullshit on the method by which it was ignited. And while we're on the subject of Mordor, let's talk about the word Udûn, which is the name of the episode. Udûn comes up twice in the lore of Tolkien. The earliest example of Udûn, it's one of the names for the first keep that was built by Melkor, who would eventually be known as Morgoth, and that's why Gandalf refers to the Balrog that he's fighting in Fellowship of the Ring, Flame of Udûn, because Morgoth's servants, some of his most powerful servants, were the Balrogs. But Udûn is also the name of kind of the northwestern plain of Mordor to the northwest of Mount Doom. And that's not entirely uncommon in Tolkien, where he would introduce certain words or names and then he would reuse them in a different context, because over decades he was putting together his great mythos, this incredible fictional setting. And so sometimes you'll see a name like Glorfindel popping up in different eras, and you're like, oh, was that the same Glorfindel or different Glorfindel? Or take a word like Ecthelion, which pops up in the Fall of Gondolin, but it also pops up in the context of Minas Tirith many thousands of years later. So Udûn's just yet another one of those words that Tolkien reused under different circumstances. Now, how all these orcs knew to start chanting Udûn when the river was rushing in right before Mount Doom reignited, who the hell knows, because according to Adar, they've been operating independently from Sauron. He even claims he tried to kill Sauron, so why would all these orcs, these minions, know about Sauron's secret plan for lighting up the volcano? Once again, none of the writers on this show are thinking anything through, and I have a feeling they're all kind of going in different directions at once, and it's just total, complete fucking chaos. Now, in the past, I've talked about how Halbrand is one of the characters of this show that I like, and I know a lot of people out there think that he's actually Sauron. Whether or not he is, I don't know. Once again, who knows if even the writers know who Sauron truly is at this point, because I have so little confidence in them. But there were a few areas of frustration for me with the character of Halbrand, like when Galadriel's chasing Adar on horseback. He leaves the village first, Galadriel's chasing, and then Halbrand sees them, he starts chasing, and yet somehow magically, boop, he just like teleports way out in front of them and is able to ride up to Adar and trip his horse with a spear. I'm sorry. You're just asking people to call bullshit once again, like how the Númenóreans just magically show up at this village and ride in to save the day when they've got no prior knowledge, or how Halbrand just magically teleports. It's almost like the writers are like, well, what's convenient, what's easiest, and they just do what's most expedient as opposed to earning these moments that they're trying to set up. And this whole nonsense about him being the king of the Southlands and everybody being all excited. All we've seen of the quote-unquote Southlands is this village of a couple dozen people. Is that it? I mean, is he the king of a couple dozen people? Like, does a village really need a king? I don't think so. Like, kingdoms need a king, perhaps. A giant land might need a king. But this is just a handful of people. Maybe all you need is like a town council or a mayor. It reminded me of that scene from Monty Python on the Holy Grail when that villager is confronting Arthur over how he was never properly elected and how, being chosen by the Lady of the Lake is no foundation for a system of government. But once again, why these people would suddenly embrace Halbrand of all people, it's an unearned dramatic beat, whereas the Lord of the Rings trilogy spent 3 movies establishing Aragorn as somebody that people could really get behind. And when he arrives with an undead army to finish the Battle of Pelennor Fields, once again, he earns his crown many times over. But I guess just as a way of wrapping this video up, at least on the good side, we only have 2 more episodes to look forward to before it'll all be over, and then we can take a break for a year or 2 until they finish the next season. I believe they start shooting next month. And I hope they take a good long while to do some rewrites and to really think it through, because obviously they've got all the resources in the world that any filmmaking team could ever hope for delivering a good show. And I feel like this episode was the closest they've come yet to really pulling it off. But it's like every time they're about to, really give us something special, the clumsy writing, the unearned story beats, the unearned dramatic beats, the hollow dialogue, all these things just keep tripping up the show left and right. And I know every single person associated with the show wanted to do a good job, but it's just, maybe it's lacking a really compelling director or producer or writer that can really lead the charge and kind of harness all these different elements and really bring them all together and get them all marching in the same direction, because right now it just feels like it's going in a bunch of different directions at once. And that will probably continue next episode as we see the Harfoots coming back, as well as the dwarves coming back for this really silly subplot where the elves have requested that they basically bathe in the light of Mithril to get their juices back. I despise that subplot. At least we were spared that subplot for 1 episode. But I'm going to wash this episode out of my mouth now. I'm not going to worry about it that much because I've got another episode of House of the Dragon to look forward to on Sunday. And House of the Dragon might be the most satisfying franchise out there right now that I can think of in terms of a franchise with a lot of history in terms of books, previous shows, etc., which is really just firing on all cylinders right now. But before I go, I have an important question to ask all of you. And this question comes from Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel. And they want to know, does your happy trail look more like a happy highway? Does your bush peek out over your fence? If you had to even think about the answer, you need the revolutionary products from Manscaped. Success is when preparation meets opportunity, and Manscaped's Platinum Package will make sure you're prepared when opportunity strikes. Join the 6 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the code WRONGREEL. The Manscaped Platinum Package 4.0 is the one-stop shop for the man who deserves it all. They designed this package to allow you to fully align your entire hygiene routine with elite products. So if you want to support this YouTube channel or my podcast, Wrong Reel, go to the link in the description below and you will have my eternal, undying gratitude. But more importantly, if you like this video, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. And if you're tired of hearing me bitching about Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, check out my videos on House of the Dragon, where I just vomit praise all over that show, and you'll hear videos or you'll see videos that have a very different tone. But I think that's all I've got to say for now, so I'm going to wrap this up. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.